I think there's so many ways you can make a difference. It can be in government, in business, in NGOs. You have to start with yourself first. For me, it's very important that I live according to my own values. When they align, I'm very happy and I can do the work, even though it's hard, sometimes long days, very difficult subjects. But if your values align, then you can keep on going.
Welcome back, everybody. Rich Brubaker, founder of Collective Responsibility, and this is the Sustainable Ambassador podcast. Through this series, I speak with sustainable ambassadors around the world about the work they're doing and how they got to where they are. Today, I'm really excited to have the LGBTQ plus lead for the Dutch government. I met her in Shanghai when she was vice consul in the economic department, and we were doing a lot of work on sustainable issues, helping the Dutch business community navigate what was happening here. It's great to have you with us. If you wouldn't mind, please give a proper introduction to the community.
Thanks, Rich. My name is Anne-Roos, or in English, Anne-Roos Wasser. I'm 33 years old, working for the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, indeed previously in China, but now in the Human Rights and Multilateral Department in The Hague, responsible for the portfolio called Equal Rights for LGBTIQ plus persons, because that's one of our human rights priorities as the Dutch government. Concretely, that means I work with a lot of NGOs, businesses, other governments, ensuring that LGBTIQ plus persons get the equal rights that they deserve. We do that, for example, through working with NGOs in other countries, supporting them, funding them, also working with other governments through the United Nations, for example, or the European Union, the Council of Europe, and making sure that the equal rights of LGBTIQ plus persons are adhered to there.
As a start off, what's the state of affairs? What are the issues that you are looking at? What are the issues that are of importance right now? And then what are you trying to accomplish in your role?
Well, I would say till 10 years ago, the human rights situation globally across the board was improving because of decades of human rights work and funding to human rights organizations. But the thing is, the world looks much different today. I won't go into too much detail, but we do really see that also in the field of LGBTIQ plus equal rights. Countries, organizations, religious actors, they are trying to undermine the equal rights of LGBTIQ plus persons. And we call this the anti-gender and anti-LGBTIQ plus movement, because this is what a lot of organizations and some governments are focusing on. So what we are trying to do is really strategize with other countries, with other human rights organizations on how to basically hold the fort for human rights issues, because there's a big battle going on.
What are some of the specific maybe challenges, issues, examples that you're seeing of where it's struggling? Or what are some examples that we can go back to and say, okay, we need to fix that?
For example, countries like Poland or Hungary, there's strict government policy actually limiting the rights of LGBTIQ plus persons, and that is also going against human rights treaties and the European values. What we also see happening in our several countries in Western Africa, where you see that there is very terrible anti-LGBTIQ plus legislation already there or being made or being intensified. So what we are doing over there is working again with local civil society, human rights defenders, LGBTIQ plus persons, to lobby, and also actually harnessing the power of business, because businesses are saying, hey, we have international offices also in your country. You are discriminating against LGBTIQ plus persons. Well, maybe we will move our office if that happens, because we also have a responsibility. We as a government, we try to bring all those actors together and supporting common strategies to counter such developments.
Yes, I was going to ask, what is the role of government here? Because NGOs, I know to be pretty clear, they're going to be activists, identifying the issues, really talking about it publicly. But what is the work or the role of the governments in this space?
Bringing different actors together, because we have a network in the NGO world, human rights organizations, businesses, you name it. So you can provide a space and say, okay, we have a common issue, let's work together on it. Very practically, you can also provide as an embassy, for example, a safe space for activists working on things. You can provide a safe space in the embassy or in a consulate, or to make common strategies on tackling those human rights challenges. I would say also the role of government versus other actors is that you you are working on standard setting, human rights standards through the United Nations, through the EU. Yeah, I would say those two things are the most important role of government.
Looking at your work, you said you have a portfolio. What does a portfolio mean, and what is your actual job on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think portfolio, the word we use, it would maybe be similar to an account if you work in business. So my account is, equal rights for LGBTIQ plus persons. So anybody can come to me if they want to talk about that. When it comes to our foreign policy, because I work at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And what it concretely means is I work on funding, on diplomacy, and on cooperation with different actors. Business, NGOs, United Nations, you name it.
How did you get started in government and why?
Yeah, by accident, actually. I studied history and then I didn't know what to do after. And I did an internship at the Dutch embassy in Tel Aviv. Then I actually ended up liking it a lot and I applied for the diplomatic training program. And I rolled into it, but it was never a long-term plan or a long-term strategy. I just took it as it came, actually.
And if it's take it as you come, what keeps you going along the way? Is it just the opportunity to move around and see amazing places and have great food, or what keeps you going in terms of the job?
What I like the most is that you can move every few years, and it doesn't always have to be abroad, because right now I'm working from the Netherlands, but you get to change jobs and do a totally new thing every 3 to 5 years. So the challenge that you get to sort of reinvent yourself every few years, that's one thing that keeps me going. But I think also sort of a red thread throughout my career has been making an impact in the field of human rights. Okay. My master's thesis were also about the human rights situation in Bahrain. So that's actually what feeds my heart, that I feel I can make an impact and do something for others in other countries.
How did you get into human rights to begin with? And then why is government the best vehicle for you to have impact right now?
Yeah, I think human rights as a theme is because I think it's a very clear tool to make sure that people are treated equally. And that has always been something that I was very interested in from a young age. So I think human rights provide a framework to make sure that everybody's treated equally. Why government was the best vehicle for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the best vehicle for driving impact.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's the best vehicle. I think it's a powerful vehicle because governments, they have a lot of influence, they have a lot of funding, but they also have their limitations, right? I work at the Human Rights Department, but the main job of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs is to promote the interests and the safety and the welfare of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, of the Dutch citizens. Number one priority is not to promote human rights in other countries.
How does that limitation become something practical for you, and the limitations around your work or around what you would hope to do? How does that become an obstacle, or how does it become a challenge? And then how do you try and navigate through that?
Whether it is about cooperation with another government or with NGOs or speaking out about certain things, you always have to weigh all the different interests that are at play. And that is something that I have to do as well, also in coordination with other governments. And you cannot always do all the things that you want from a human rights perspective if you work at a government. You cannot. You have to make choices. If you don't want to do that, if I would not want to do that, I would have to start working at a human rights organization, because then you can always speak out clearly, for example, about things that are happening. But we also have to indeed keep into account trade relations, bilateral issues. So there's a lot of different interests at play, a lot of things that can also not necessarily be shared publicly. So that's also difficult sometimes as a government, because people think that if they don't see something happen publicly, that nothing is happening, which is not true, because there's always a lot of diplomacy happening, of course, behind the scenes.
Well, isn't that maybe an advantage also of over, say, business or NGOs, that you have that ability to be above and below the line and be talking to the same organizations, to the same stakeholder, but publicly you're saying one thing and you're making some progress, but then privately you can make a different level of progress. Because I feel like business and nonprofits, it feels very different for me, and how you make progress when you see an obstacle. But the way that you described it, it's a little bit, I won't say easier, but it's different. And have you looked at that? Do you view it the same way?
Perhaps government's diplomacy can also be a little bit slower than business sometimes. I think business, of course, the main the main priority for business is to make profit or to increase value for its stakeholders, that also limits bureaucracy.
If you move a little bit slower, then
Mhm.
how do you view the work that you're doing? Are you trying to make it accomplish things on a quarterly by quarterly basis, or are you looking much
Good question.
longer and like the glacial move?
Sometimes find it difficult because I don't think you can measure social progress always in those kind of categories. And we are really more focused on indeed the long-term perspective, because again, for governments, we want welfare, we want stability, we want human rights. But those are all things that you cannot just accomplish in a day, in a year, in several years actually. So we really take a long-term view. And that's why, for example, also our human rights programming is usually around 5 years, so that we can really, in those 5 years, see what's happening and then steer in another direction accordingly when needed.
How long are you into this job? About 1 year now?
Yeah, it's a year and 4 months, something like that.
Months. So what do you want to accomplish at the end of the 5th year? And how do you then break that down into things that you need to be doing this year or this quarter?
Yeah, I hope that in the next 5 years, through mostly the funding that we do and the cooperations that we have with other actors with the same agenda, that we can hold the fort. Like I said, the global pushback on equal rights, on human rights, that we can make sure it doesn't get worse. And then secondly, if we can have less countries where LGBTIQ plus people are criminalized for who they are, who they love, even if it's a few countries, I'm already very happy. And that's, I think, what we should continue to do and what I will do in the next 3 to 4 years.
So what are the kind of organizations that you work? You mentioned NGOs a couple times. Are you dealing with the activist organizations, the programmatic organizations, and how does your funding help them? Is it capacity building, or is it more event or say program specific?
Well, we have two big strategic partnerships. One is called Free to Be Me and the other one is called Power of Pride. They are both run by a consortium or an alliance of NGOs from the Netherlands and from the Global South. And they are together active in around 30 countries. And these two grants, they are actually the largest LGBTIQ plus grants ever given. So making the Netherlands also the biggest donor for this topic in the world. And we actually work through them. They do the work and they work with local organizations and they give, for example, trainings indeed, so capacity building, they do re-granting, they do advocacy at the UN, bringing the knowledge that they're getting in these countries to the United Nations and to other governments. And then we have a few smaller ones that are still running, not small in nature, but smaller in grant size, with Outright Action International, for example, Astra-EA, Amnesty.
You went from human rights to economic development, back to human rights, but mainly focus on LGBT. Why did you leave Shanghai to get into this, and why focus on this group or this issue in particular?
In Shanghai, through the Dutch consulate, we were focusing on diversity and inclusion trainings, for example, for Dutch businesses. And part of that is, of course, also providing attention to the diversity in your workforce, so LGBTIQ plus people as well. And so I got into contact with some people working on that, and they really inspired me so much. And then I saw this job become available in the ministry and I was like, this is it. This is what I want to do. I was ready for something that could make a more positive impact as well. And this topic as the Netherlands is really one where we can make a difference.
Making a difference. What does that mean to you? What are you hoping to accomplish yourself through this current position or through the career you've been having?
I think it's just easily summed up as saying being a good person to my environment in a more personal sphere, but also doing good things in the human rights department by making sure that we all stick to our own values and that we keep doing the work that we're doing, also knowing that the political environment in the Netherlands is also becoming less supportive of human rights. Okay. So again, holding the fort. It's not very inspirational, I know, but the situation of the world when it comes to human rights, it's so difficult and so under attack that I think holding the fort is already a very big accomplishment.
This is where I keep coming back to. Why do you choose the work that you do and in the medium that you are? We're all trying to make progress, but you've chosen this path and you found this department, you found this portfolio. Like, if you're a young professional and you want to change the world, part of what I'm trying to figure out is how do you make the best decisions? It's getting more difficult, not just maybe within your own government, but within others. How do you keep yourself motivated?
For me personally, I keep motivation by trying to see the positive developments always. And that can be very hard, but you can remind yourself of that by digging into literature or documentaries, talking to people, and getting your inspiration from others that are doing positive work. I think there's so many ways you can make a difference. It can be in government, in business, in NGOs. Maybe we should also be a little bit selfish, because you have to start with yourself first, right? You have to do something that is makes you tick, makes you happy, makes you want to go to work. So I actually just followed my heart and my intuition, and that brought me into this job. But it could have just as well been another job. But for me, it's very important that I live according to my own values, personally and professionally. When they align, I'm very happy, and I can do the work, even though it's hard, sometimes long days, very difficult subjects. But if your values align, then you can keep on going.
What do you want to achieve through this job over the next 3 to 4 years?
Stable, long-term funding for LGBTIQ plus organizations. Because right now it's only maybe 10, 12, max 15 countries that really fund organizations. And you can only do the work if you have enough funding. Yeah. So I see that as a job for myself and other colleagues, that we can continue working on that and incentivize other governments and other businesses, actually, because businesses can also use their CSR, RBC profile and their work to actually directly fund LGBTIQ plus organizations, for example. So I'd like to focus on that in the next few years.
So 10, 12, 15 countries, how many do you want before you leave?
Well, I think it's already a big accomplishment if we have 3 more, because it's been the same 10 to 15 countries for the past 20 years. So sometimes you have to start small, think big, but start small.
So then what's the work involved in converting those 3? Like how do you approach that?
Well, we approach that, first of all, by sort of getting those governments into international coalitions that we have. For example, the United Nations LGBTI core group or the Equal Rights Coalition. So bringing more countries in and sort of, getting them in the group and saying, okay, this is what we do. Let's work on it together. And then you can build from there and intensify your bilaterals or your one-to-one contact with these countries. And really invest in the relationship and try to find common ground in the human rights things that you work on. I think that's a good approach to start with. And that's already a process of years, actually, if you think about that.
Yeah, but are there common obstacles that you run into whenever you're trying to engage someone who's maybe even they're close, they just can't get across the line? Like, are there some is it just the money, or is it what the politics, or what's the common obstacles?
I mean, it depends indeed on the budget that countries have for their foreign policy or their human rights programming, and that of course is decided mostly in parliaments. And parliaments politics change every few years, so it's very much in that sense you can't really influence it that much. So sometimes you also have to be a little bit flexible in the coalitions that you have and bide your time.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in international NGOs, and they feel kind of the same way sometimes. Like you ebb and flow with the times in a very different way than someone in the marketplace, a business leader would. They're really just, they're going to hammer through, or they're going to pivot to something else. But you don't really have that luxury, do you? You really have to stick with it.
I see governments as sort of big, super big ships, oil tankers, maybe even. And of course, when the political wind changes, the direction changes, but also not always that much. Some things will always continue. And so, I take comfort from that we are actually, it's not all the way from right to left and then back again.
Which I think you might feel it is in the moment, right? But if you step back and look, you can say, okay, look, it shifted, but it's not a seismic shift.
Yeah, and that's where history is helpful, because if you look back, you can never really know what's happening when you're in it. But if you look back, you can see patterns, and you can actually take comfort in knowing that social change, it happens slowly but surely. And that gives me the motivation to continue, even though it feels you're being attacked from all sides. So,
well, using that as the springboard for my last question, the patterns of history. What tips or recommendations would you give students or young professionals who are looking at, sustainability as their passion, but view a career in government as their medium for change or their vehicle for change? What tips would you give them as they're preparing to enter or accelerate a career through the government space?
Yeah, I would recommend learning another language than your own native language, or beyond English as well. If you want to do any work in a government or United Nations or related agencies, it helps if you know one of the 6 official UN languages. So invest in that. Get experience outside of your academic pursuits. So if it's a charity, a board, a student association, anything that also helps you train your management, leadership skills, working with other teams, that's always super helpful. And I think reading as much as possible and traveling, if you have the means for that, can really help you broaden your perspective, your views, and give you a lot of depth that you cannot get from other things. I think those are my 3 tips.
Well, thank you very much for your time. Greatly appreciated. So,
yeah, thank you too. It was fun.